Here we are again at the northernmost edge of the territory we think of as Israel, although it wasn't named that at the time, Palestine. And Jesus is turning his face to Jerusalem. He and his disciples are walking along, and he asks a perfectly innocuous, simple question: who do people say that I am? And they answer him, well, some think you're John the Baptist, even though he lost his head. Some of you think that you're Elijah, because we know he took the chariot of fire up into heaven, so we're not really sure where he went. And some of you just think maybe another prophet. Anybody, pick a prophet, any prophet will do. And Jesus says, well, who do you say that I am? And for the very first time in the Gospel of Mark, the word Messiah is spoken out loud. It is from Peter, the first of those disciples, called the one some people think is the one closest to Jesus. Of course, the Gospel of John will argue against that, because John was, as far as John is concerned. But he says, you are the Messiah. And Jesus then says, yeah, but don't tell anybody. And furthermore, the Son of Man, which is what he usually calls himself in the Gospel of Mark, will be arrested and tried and tortured and crucified, and on the third day he will rise again. Well, have you ever given instructions to somebody and you give more than about two, and the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth are just out the window? Just don't hear those, do we? It's just like, okay, do this and what? That's kind of the way it was with the disciples. Jesus said, the Son of Man will be crucified, and they all went, that can't be, that just can't be. And they missed the rest. And so Peter steps up and takes Jesus aside. That was nice of him. And he says, that's not the way it's going to be. You're the Messiah. This doesn't work. And Jesus turns on Peter, and in front of all the disciples, no taking him aside, thank you, he says, get behind me, Satan. And Jesus means it. Peter really wanted to cling to the understanding of what the Messiah was, what the Messiah would be for the nation of Israel. Just Israel. We're not talking about anybody else, just the Jews. He was to rid them of the Roman people who ran the place, of those who came in and oppressed them. He was to raise up the tribes until they were once again glorious. And Jesus says, not quite. At least not the way you think. And he argues that it is the Satan, the adversary, who has put those words into Peter's mouth, who has kept Peter firmly rooted in terra firma, the world, what's going on in the temporal life of the country, and taken him completely out of the realm of the spiritual, out of the realm of God, the kingdom of God. It takes at least two more times telling the disciples that he will be crucified and risen before maybe they hear that. But you'll remember at the end of the Gospel of Mark, there's nobody left. They all run away. Peter denies him 3 times. The women go back to the tomb. They're told that the tomb is empty because Jesus has risen and he'll meet them in Galilee like he said, and now go tell everybody. And they go, I don't think so. And they run away too. Nobody gets off lightly in this gospel. Nobody ends up being the shining boy or girl. They all run away because we don't get resurrection. We don't understand that God can make that happen. Even though way back before they started for Jerusalem, Jesus said, now here's what's going to happen. And he will be raised on the 3rd day. But that was too many instructions, and it went out their heads. Jesus goes on to tell them about those who would follow him, those who are going to be in his company, need to take up their cross, need to lose their life for his sake so that they can gain it. And those who hang on to their lives will surely lose them. Confusing words, but start with the beginning of that statement. Those who will follow me. The followers of Jesus, in so following, have taken up their cross. The cross is not a burden that we suddenly have to bear because there's somebody ill in our families and it's just one more thing we have to take on. It's not the next door neighbor who won't cut their grass. It's not our own, impacted wisdom teeth, the burden we have to bear. It's faith in Jesus. It's belief in the Almighty, the one who will lead us in the way we are to go, to whom we must deny our innermost selves, that part that says, that's crazy. What's he talking about? And say, I don't get it, God, but we're going to go there. All of us have known somebody who has taken up that cross and acted like it in their lives. Today is UBE Sunday, and it's the day when we celebrate Alexander Crummell, and Debbie will tell you more about him later. But I need to tell you that when he took up his cross, he did it without the support of the church. As a matter of fact, it's a real black stain on the Episcopal Church, which has many of them. He wanted to be a priest. He was called to be a priest. He felt that call. He was affirmed by another priest in the church, and he asked to go to General Seminary, and they said, oh, no, you can't come. Because if you come, we're going to lose a big donation from the Diocese of South Carolina. That was the reason, boys and girls. Big money out the door. Finally, they decided they really would let him come, but he couldn't live on campus, and he couldn't eat in the refectory, and they really didn't want him to be in classes either, but they were going to let him do that. And he said, I don't think so. And he was educated on his own, what we call reading for orders. He was ordained a deacon and then ordained a priest 2 years later, and he could not find a church. But he kept on going. He kept on speaking the truth. He kept on being in churches as a supply priest, wherever he could find one. That's taking up your cross. That's knowing that that is the way, the truth, and the life, and you have to be on that path. Thurgood Marshall's another one. A native Episcopalian. I don't like cradle Episcopalian, it's a strange term. He always acted out of faith. He always did what he believed God was telling him was the right thing to do. And he was led in that by a woman named Polly Murray, who was born in Durham, North Carolina, raised in the Episcopal Church, I think, became a civil rights activist in 1943, way ahead of anybody else, folks, and also was the founder of the National Organization of Women, ordained in the Episcopal Church. I knew a man in Orchard Park, New York, which is where I lived for about 14 years when we adopted our children, and I got my master's degree in library science and all sorts of other things. He was a banker. He worked for one of the big banks in town, and our priest at our church, he was a member of our church, our priest was doing a D-Min, I guess, not a PhD, and he wanted to talk about business ethics. That could be dicey. And this man, I think his name was Bill, was in that class. And it really spoke to him. It really helped him to affirm why he was in banking, what it was that he believed he was supposed to do as a Christian banker. Well, the bank had overhired and money was not coming in the way they wanted it to, and they're, people that need to be paid, higher ups, CEOs. And so they came to this man, Bill, and they said, we need you to fire Jim. And he said, why? Well, he was the last one hired, so he has to be the first one fired. He said, why are we firing anybody? And they said, well, because we have too many people on staff and we need the money somewhere else. He said, but that's not right. He comes to work every day. He does a good job. He has a family. He works hard for you people. And they said, well, that's just too bad. He has to be fired. And he said, well, I won't do it. And they said, well, they'll fire you too. And they did, both of them, and probably a few others. It never bothered him. Eventually he found a job, but yeah, he was out of work for a year or so. He just kept on doing what he knew was right. He kept on going on the path that a follower of Jesus has to use. The path that is slightly different for all of us, but is always the same path. And the thing about that path is that we never walk it alone. Not just the presence of God, who mitigates the pain and the anguish of carrying our cross, but also the presence of others. We gather in community because we cannot bear our crosses alone. We need help. And you, my friends, help me bear my cross all the time. All week long, I know you're there for me, even though you're not in my living room or my car or wherever I happen to be. I know you're there. I know you're saying your prayers just like I'm saying my prayers. We are all bearing the cross. We are all walking the path. It's what we do, except we don't always. And we all know those moments too. Moments we beat ourselves up about when we should have said something, when we should have done something, when we should have been somewhere and just didn't want to do it, so we didn't. And it weighs on us. It's heavier than the cross, probably. But we ask for forgiveness, and when we do that, we have to trust that forgiveness is given and we need to give it up too. I had a priest tell me once that he had a man come to confess his sins, and he said at the end of his confession, I know God has forgiven me, but I just can't forgive myself. And the priest said, why is your forgiveness more important than God's? If God can forgive you, what made you so almighty that you have to hang on to your sins? We let them go because we know we're following Jesus. And we know we'll make mistakes. And we know we won't always get it right, but we know the burden of that cross. And sometimes it is truly a burden, and other times it is an incredible blessing. But unlike the disciples, we have been here long enough to hear the whole statement. The Son of Man will be given up and crucified, and on the third day, he will be resurrected.